Hey, I'm back and I'm excited to have Dr. Nathan Bryan on the podcast to talk about nitric oxide. As I read his book and I've followed him on LinkedIn originally and Instagram, he's all over the place speaking and sharing this mission. So, The Secret of Nitric Oxide, you want to read this book and understand the role of nitric oxide in our body and really understanding signs and symptoms of low nitric oxide can be correlated with a long list of chronic health issues that a lot of people struggle with. And it's never just one thing, but it could be a lot of it related to low stomach acid. But as a root cause health investigator, I'm always thinking, all right, why is the nitric oxide low? What's causing it to be low? Why is this happening? And dig deeper and looking at north to south, how our body works, how the innate intelligence is supposed to work, and what goes wrong when we don't give it the nutrients it needs, and when chronic stress can impact everything. Toxic burden overload, vagus nerve toxicity, chronic stress leading us into this state of fight or flight and not being as resilient as we age. So, as I'm focusing on the show, how you can be fit and healthy from the inside out, we need to talk about nitric oxide. It's really important part of aging and being healthy as you age. Just because you exercise, we tend to think that we are healthy. And if you really dial in to the clues that we can collect from functional lab testing or just looking at nutritional therapy analysis, signs and symptoms related to oxidative stress in excessive amount, leaky gut inflammation, body inflammation, leaky brain, all these different things that can be a result of doing too much of everything, not eating a good, clean, healthy food diet, not prioritizing your sleep, not breathing through your nose. I mean, all sorts of things. So, signs and symptoms of nitric oxide deficiency. Let me read my list here. Let's look at circulatory vascular symptoms, high blood pressure, cold hands and feet leads to clues of poor microcirculation, varicose veins, edema, clues to weak vascular tone and poor endothelial health. We have poor wound healing, reduced blood flow and nutrient delivery, rectal dysfunction in men, of course, is often discussed with nitric oxide as it's required in vasodilation in the pineal arteries. And then we have common migraine and headaches. That's related to vascular dysregulation and impaired dilation of cerebral blood vessels. Those struggling with brain fog, memory issues, this can be related to nitric oxide as it supports blood flow and neurotransmission in the brain. Low heart rate variability, vagus nerve dysfunction. This can be connected with nitric oxide, low levels of impaired signaling and autonomic imbalance. Then we can talk about metabolic and energy symptoms. Insulin resistance and elevated blood sugar. Nitric oxide helps glucose uptake into the muscles. Deficiency worsens your metabolic syndrome. And fatigue, exercise intolerance. Nitric oxide facilitates oxygen delivery and mitochondria efficiency. Then we have poor recovery after exercise, reduction in oxygen and nutrient delivery, and slower clearance of waste if we don't have the nitric oxide on board. Then we have immune and inflammatory symptoms, cardiovascular systems. We went over cardiorespiratory systems and just general systemic clues of aging, skin wrinkles, because it's poor blood flow and loss of collagen. And this is cross-linking together. Sexual dysfunction, low libido, dizziness, orthostatic intolerance due to impaired vascular adaptation to posture changes. So as we look at root cause connection in a functional medicine approach, as I'm a holistic health practitioner, looking for clues, putting the missing pieces of a health puzzle together for clients, looking at the role of endothelial on the layer in our blood vessels, less nitric oxide production in blood vessels when we have poor nitric oxide. Oral microbiome we'll talk about. Mouthwash, fluoride, PPIs, this all can impair nitrate to nitrite conversion that I did a whole podcast on. And then aging, yes, we have a natural decline in our nitric oxide production beginning as early as our 30s, but we can do something about it, as I always say, not blame the aging process, but yes, we get lower production of a lot of things. So why don't we do something about it? Take it, make it. Nutrition, we look at low arginine, citrulline, folate, antioxidants, and cofactors for creating nitric oxide. Then we have lifestyle stressors that we talk about all the time: poor sleep, chronic stress, lack of exercise, or a lot of us here do too much exercise, smoking, and high sugar diet. So nitric oxide deficiency shows up as poor circulation, poor oxygen delivery, and poor signaling. And this is touching cardiovascular, metabolic, neurological, and immune systems all at once. So I think this is an important topic that not enough people are diving into, and looking at the missing pieces of your health puzzle together. Foundations. Yes, we talk about the vagus nerve, getting more resiliency, but are we talking about, do I have enough nitric oxide to increase that blood flow? So it's putting all the pieces of the puzzle together, making sure the liver, the detox pathways, the drainage pathways are open. We're eliminating through our poop and our pee and our sweat and our breath. Our lymph is flowing, our bile is being made. So all of this body functions need to be working at optimal level. So I talk about it as creating metabolic harmony. Your vagus nerve is a conductor. And when we get one player not showing up, not working at the optimal level, we have dysfunction in all areas. And as Reed Davis talks about in our FDN practitioner world, metabolic chaos is a result. So there are a lot of things to talk about. So I will try to do a follow-up on nitric oxide because I only have Dr. Nathan Bryan for 1 hour and he has another call after me. So let's dive in to the role of nitric oxide and how we can improve nitric oxide production, what you can do to test for it, and solutions as we age. And I don't know about you, but I'm on a mission to improve my future self. So what can we do today to be our best self in the future so we can thrive and not struggle when we are retired and living life to the fullest? Stay tuned. All right, I've got Dr. Nathan Bryan on the podcast. I've been trying to get him on for a while now because I'm so fascinated, Dr. Nathan, about all this information. I've read your book, I've followed you on LinkedIn and social media, and just the role of nitric oxide in the body is just fascinating how it correlates to all these different root causes, symptoms, putting the missing pieces of the puzzle together. So I'm so excited to dive in and get to some root causes for a lot of people.
Well, thanks, Debbie. Glad we finally connected and happy to be with you.
Well, I know you're busier. You seem to be speaking at some conference or some event somewhere around the world nonstop. So what makes you feel so passionate about the nitric oxide?
Well, I've been researching this molecule for the past 25 years. I first introduced to it in the late 90s when a Nobel Prize was awarded, and it captured my attention. And fast forward 25 years, and we've learned a lot about this molecule. We understand what goes wrong, and we understand how the human body makes it. We understand what goes wrong in people that can't make it. And so what gets me excited is we've answered a lot of fundamental questions, and now we can start to integrate these common sense approaches and product technology into patient care, and we're seeing patients get better. So because it's really a foundational molecule.
It is, and it's not known for a lot of people how it works. So if we can just review, people can read the book and read all your information out there, but briefly, the role of nitric oxide in the body we'll get into, but how is it supposed to be made naturally?
Well, we understand today there's two primary pathways of production. The first to be discovered was an enzyme called nitric oxide synthase. And that enzyme is found in our endothelial cells, and those are the cells that line all blood vessels throughout the body. It's also found in our epithelial cells, which in our upper airway and our sinuses. And so we have to focus on maintaining the function of that enzyme so that our body can make nitric oxide on a second to second basis. And then number two, it's made through the oral bacteria and the stomach acid and through our diet. And so when we eat, a high nitrate meal, for example, through green leafy vegetables, that nitrate is converted to nitrite by the oral bacteria. We swallow our saliva, we get nitric oxide produced in the lumen of the stomach. So that's how the body is normally designed to make nitric oxide. So we're finding that there are a lot of things that we Americans do that inhibit its natural production. And that's what leads to the onset and progression of chronic disease.
Yeah, and it seems to be so many people don't have the right microbiome in their mouth that they don't realize they're unintentionally killing all their good bacteria with mouthwash. And then we are supposed to convert the nitrate to nitrite in the mouth from that bacteria, right? So that's the first
Okay.
step.
That's right.
And then it goes down and
Well, the first step, yeah, no, that's part of it. So it's a three-step process that we have to check boxes, right? So number one, we have to get enough nitrate in our diet to fuel and feed these bacteria. And then because it's an inherently inefficient system. So we know we have to have a certain amount of nitrate as a bolus in a single meal. That nitrate, 90 minutes after we consume it's taken up in our gut, put back in our salivary glands. So now each time we salivate, the salivary glands are secreting nitrate, the bacteria on the crypts of the tongue metabolize this 2-electron reduction into nitrite. Now our saliva is enriched in nitrite. We swallow our saliva, and we have to have stomach acid production because it's that acid disproportionation of nitrite into nitric oxide that produces nitric oxide gas in the lumen of the stomach. So hopefully you can start to see these steps that most Americans are bypassing. Number one, the American diet is awful. Number two out of three Americans use mouthwash. Most people are using toothpaste with a fluoride in it, killing the bacteria in your mouth. And then 100 million prescriptions written for antacids every year. 2 out of 3 Americans are using an over-the-counter antacids, which you don't even have to have a prescription for. And it's making people sick. It's causing heart attack, stroke, Alzheimer's, and it's killing people.
And I've been looking at the medications, the research on PPIs. They were only originally supposed to be for 2 months. And somehow I'm seeing, max 2 months. And a lot of times it's not solving why it's not, the stomach acid is not too high. So it's looking at, okay, what is happening over the years that we've gotten this misinformation. And now I think probably why you're on this mission is to help educate people, as with your toothpaste and all these different things we can do to improve that nitric oxide production, because people aren't aware of what they're doing. They think they're being so healthy and doing the right things, but it's actually creating so many different problems downstream.
No, you're exactly right. There's so much misinformation out there. What I try to do is take the information and create knowledge from it, because there's too much information, and a lot of it's misinformation. So how do we take science, take that information, and convert it into knowledge and wisdom that we can employ and apply every day to heal the body? Mm-hmm. So number one, we'll start at the big culprit, and that's the proton pump inhibitors. As you mentioned, those drugs were only approved for the acute use for gastroesophageal reflux. No safety studies done ever on the chronic use of these. And decades ago, you don't even have to have a prescription now. These are over-the-counter medications that people have been taking for 10, 15, 20 years. And the consequences to that, now the safety data have finally been done in prospective clinical trials. And the data are clear. If you've been taking these drugs for at least 3 years, you have a 40% greater incidence of heart attack, stroke, and Alzheimer's. These are dangerous drugs, and they should be taken off the market, or at the very least, the FDA and RFK, if you're listening to this, there needs to be a black box warning on these drugs. Mm-hmm. The omeprazole, the pantoprazole. If you're admitted to the hospital in the U.S., no matter what cause, trauma, acute influenza illness, whatever, the first thing they do is put you on a proton pump inhibitor, omeprazole. If you're admitted, it's part of your medication. So a black box warning needs to be put on these drugs because they're causing heart attack, stroke, Alzheimer's, and they're killing people. These are worse than the COX-2 inhibitors, the Vioxx and the Celebrex from 25 years ago. And yet those drugs were taken off the market, and there's a black box warning on them now. These drugs are even more dangerous. So we have to address this because the safety data are there. And what I look at is the risk benefit. What are the benefit these drugs provide, and at what cost, at what risk?
Yeah.
Number one, there's no benefit. There's never a benefit of inhibiting stomach acid secretion. Our body needs stomach acid to break down proteins, to absorb nutrients. There's zero benefit to antacids. What's the risk? Oh, just heart attack, stroke, Alzheimer's, and death. I think that's a very easy quotient. And when there's no benefit and it's all risk, these drugs should not be on the market.
Well, I'm working, as I said, with clients on these medications that they have no clue about it. They have no idea what it's doing to their body. And so they're having all these different symptoms, and the doctor just gives them all these different labels and then gives them more medications. So, we're looking at it from a root cause approach, trying to get them off medications, but make sure we say here, you can't just stop taking them. And if you could just put a note in there, just in case people go, oh, I better get off of it and start tomorrow. There is an order of operations and way you have to do it and why.
Yeah, no, you can't just stop these drugs cold turkey, unfortunately, because you're going to get a hypersecretion of acid that's going to make your life really miserable. And then you'll want to stay on them because it's very painful. So what I tell people, what I recommend people is whatever dose you're taking a day, take that dose, take half that dose, and take that half dose for 10 days. After 10 doses, take that half dose every other day and do that for 10 days. And now we're slowly weaning it out of your system. And now you can actually stop those, but it's going to take at least 20 days. But then you need to take apple cider vinegar before each meal to acidify the lumen of the stomach. So now you can break down proteins. You don't get the reflux. You don't get the regurgitation because your body's actually able to digest the proteins, and it's not trying to get rid of it. So reflux disease is a symptom of insufficient stomach acid production, right? If your body can't break down proteins into amino acid, it recognizes it as a foreign substance, and it's trying to get it out of your body. It's trying to say, hey, don't do this to me. I need to get rid of this. So it's called reflux. But if you acidify the lumen of the stomach before a meal, you can break down proteins, you can absorb nutrients, and your body doesn't see it as a foreign substance, and there's no reflux.
Is it okay to do the apple cider vinegar shot of it in water now when people are on PPIs? Or
no, they need to because they have to have their body can't make stomach acid on its own. So you got to acidify the lumen of the stomach, artificially with acetic acid, which is basically just vinegar.
Yeah, simple. So the nitric oxide, I think that's why a lot of people, I'm finding as they read your information and start to look at real people where they're struggling, how we go order of operations, as you talked about in the mouth, what happens, and then the next step, and how both of those are already commonly broken in the average person because of things that we are doing because we think we're being healthy to our mouth and have good breath. Yeah. And then our stomach, we're not able to do it. So is that the reason people are so low in nitric oxide with the just broken?
Yes, it seems like everything the American diet, American medical system, American lifestyle does is completely shutting down nitric oxide production. So again, the American diet, the standard American diet, we're only getting about less than 150 milligrams of nitrate per day. So we're not even getting enough through our diet, even if we had the right bacteria to metabolize it into nitric oxide.
And that was 300 to 400, or what was that amount?
300 to 400 is what you need as a minimum, as a bolus. Okay. And then the other problem is, 2 out of 3 Americans use mouthwash every day. 2 out of 3 Americans have an unsafe elevation in blood pressure. And that's not coincidental, it's causal. And then the other problem is fluoride. 73% of the municipalities in the US put fluoride in their drinking water. Why do they do that? Because it kills the bacteria in the pipes. Well, it kills the bacteria in our pipes too. It's called our gastrointestinal system, right? It kills it. We bathe in it. It kills the bacteria in our skin. Wow. We drink the water. It kills the bacteria in our mouth and our gut. And so, even if you ate a good diet, but if you don't have the right oral bacteria, you're never going to get a nitric oxide benefit from the diet. You could eat beets till the cows come home. You could take, whatever, eat a plant-based diet. But if you don't have the right bacteria, which most people do not, you will not get a nitric oxide benefit from it. And then the other major problem we're seeing are the mouth breathers. The mouth is not an instrument for breathing. It's an instrument for speaking. And so people who who breathe through their mouth are completely causing oral dysbiosis. That's why they wake up, they have horrible breath. That's why they use mouthwash to kill the breath that's caused from mouth breathing. And the other thing, not only are they disrupting nitric oxide production because of oral dysbiosis, they're bypassing a natural nitric oxide production through nasal breathing. So, all these things that you see, and I'm on an airplane every week and sitting people next to people, and they're
Yeah.
sleeping with their mouth open, and I'm going, this guy has some serious. I could almost dictate his symptoms based on just watching him sleep, him or her sleep.
Well, I'm at that. I'm learning from you, and then I'm starting to work with clients. Go, wait a minute. They have a CPAP machine at night. Then they're not able to breathe through their nose. They have to use that one to sleep right, and then insomnia, and then so they're probably mouth breathers during the day.
Yeah.
So then I'm asking, okay, are they doing mouthwash too? And then they're on the PPIs, and then they have high blood pressure. Then they have insulin resistance, and they're having fibromyalgia or different problems in their joints and all
Yeah.
these different things. And I'm reading your information going, whoa, this is
So simple. I see it as
yeah.
clear as daylight, and I just don't understand why physicians and clinicians don't see what I see. It's it
And the
drives me crazy.
migraines, everything. I
Yeah.
just was going through that in the intro, just the connection to all these signs and symptoms of things that what are your common warning signs and symptoms of low nitric oxide production in the body that your top ones? Because there's a long list I have out here, but
Now,
what would
look,
you say?
there is a hierarchy, and I think it's important to pay attention to symptoms. Your body's always talking to you, right? You just have to listen. People who listen and make changes are typically the people who are healthiest.
Step
People
one.
who ignore it are the people who get sick. But our body always responds and our body always talks to us. So, number one, the first sign and symptom of nitric oxide deficiency or a problem in nitric oxide production is erectile dysfunction.
Mm-hmm.
When you think about this, it makes perfect sense because in order for men and women to get an erection sufficient for intercourse or orgasm, you have to dilate the blood vessels to get engorgement. And this is
Mm-hmm.
both a penile erection and a clitoral erection. And so nitric oxide is what dilates the blood vessels. If your body can't make nitric oxide, you can't dilate the blood vessels, you don't get engorgement. And we call that erectile dysfunction. And it's really the canary in the coal mine because if you've lost the ability to produce nitric oxide in the blood vessels that support the pelvic region or the sex organs, you have that same dysfunction in your coronary arteries. You have the same dysfunction in your cerebral arteries, in your pulmonary. It's a systemic disease. So that's first and foremost. Then number two, you start to see your blood pressure go up. Because nitric oxide, when it's produced, it dilates blood vessels and it dampens the response to the heartbeat. But when you lose the ability to make nitric oxide, now your blood vessels become more constricted. So now you've got the same volume of blood going through smaller pipes, and physics tell us that pressure has to go up, right? P equals VR. Pressure is related to volume and resistance. So if we decrease the dilation or we increase the constriction of the blood vessels, the resistance goes up, volume stays the same, pressure goes up. So nitric oxide fixes the physics problem of hypertension. And 2 out of 3 Americans have an unsafe elevation of blood pressure. Number three, you start to develop insulin resistance because we published in 2011 that the cell has to be able to make nitric oxide for insulin to signal and get glucose into the cell. If you can't make nitric oxide, it's a symptom, or insulin resistance is a symptom of nitric oxide deficiency. Number four, you start to develop exercise intolerance. So if you can't go up a flight of steps and you get winded and you can't, maintain a moderate 20 to 30 minute brisk exercise, then you're nitric oxide deficient. And then number four, you start to develop mild cognitive impairment, dementia, and eventually Alzheimer's. And then there's a host of other symptoms and signs, but those are the five. But if people just paid attention to those five, especially when they have ED and blood pressure, listen to your body, make changes, make adjustments, and then you won't get insulin resistance. You won't get Alzheimer's and dementia or lose your memory, and your body will perform better.
And with the blood vessels, we were talking about this at conference a couple weeks ago, the glycocalyx layer and the
Yeah.
correlation of the LDL. And it was Dave Feldman was speaking, and Martha Carlin was like, I think it's the glycocalyx layer, the barrier in is causing that stickiness in the blood vessels. So there's less room for the nitric oxide to help improve the
Well, I think,
dilation or
look, yeah, the Glycocalyx is extremely important, but it's a completely different organ system than our endothelium, right? So I think of these as completely two independent, connected but independent organ systems. So the glycocalyx is this kind of cell-free zone between the endothelium of the blood vessels and between the blood cells, whether it's red blood cells, platelets, or white blood cells. And if you have a healthy glycocalyx, then it creates that cell-free zone there to where when nitric oxide is produced or delivered by the red cell, it can diffuse into through that glycocalyx into the endothelium and even into smooth muscle. But I think more importantly, it protects the endothelium from injury, from the shear stress, from the injury, from the rolling of the monocytes and neutrophils, and mitigates the vascular inflammation. But if we look at it, it's kind of a two-way street because we need adequate nitric oxide to downregulate the adhesion molecules on the endothelium. And we need nitric oxide as a gas, by the way, which diffuses into 3 dimensions. So part of it's going to diffuse back into the circulation, affect the adhesion molecules, and affect the rolling and adhesion of monocytes, neutrophils, and macrophages. But part of it diffuses into the smooth muscle, where it activates an enzyme called guanylyl cyclase, and that leads to calcium mobilization and smooth muscle relaxation and vasodilation. So if you have a damaged glycocalyx, then that shear stress is going to create more damage in the endothelial cells and upregulate inflammatory response and cause a downregulation of nitric oxide production. So it's all this feed-forward mechanism that we have to interrupt in order to restore homeostasis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But just restoring, let me make a point. Just by restoring the glycocalyx does not mean that you've restored the function of the NOS enzyme and restored endothelial function.
What about correlations to this? We've been diving into mold toxicity and toxic burden overload, excessive overloading the liver, detoxification. Is there any correlation of mycotoxins, just overload of toxins in general, impacting nitric oxide?
Yeah, through multiple pathways. So number one, if the body sees an invading pathogen, whether it's virus, bacteria, mold, or any other pathogen, then it elicits an immune response. And this is through an enzyme called inducible nitric oxide synthase. So typically 4 hours after an infection or an injury or some type of wound response, that enzyme is upregulated, generates a lot of nitric oxide. And that's when we get an infection or a wound, right? It turns red, it becomes heat. That's the normal inflammatory response. And that's because nitric oxide has been generated locally, dilating the blood vessels, allowing for the mobilization of the immune response. And then we wall off that site of injury so the infection doesn't spread. And then that overproduction of nitric oxide kills the infection, mobilizes stem cells, and mobilizes the immune response. But then it's supposed to turn off, right? Because we don't need that chronic inflammatory response.
Yeah.
What happens in people that are chronically exposed to mold or mycotoxins or viruses that become latent and then active is they're chronically inflamed. So their body is always trying to mitigate the infection and kill the pathogen. But if we don't clear it, and we published on this, I believe, in 2004 in inflammatory bowel disease and Crohn's disease, that local overexpression of nitric oxide, the inducible nitric oxide synthase, in this particular case in the colon, completely shut down the constitutive nitric oxide production. And so these chronically inflamed patients have vascular dysfunction because it's shut down the function of the NOS enzyme in the lining of the blood vessels. And there's always a vascular component to inflammatory disease, whether it's rheumatoid arthritis, whether it's IBD, whether it's Hashimoto's. And so we have to, number one, squash the inflammation. Number two, turn back on the constitutive isoforms of nitric oxide so we can maintain normal perfusion and vascular response.
Yeah, that was another question. I was reading your book about autoimmune diseases because everyone seems to have autoimmune issues too now. So again, I'm looking at like this is all interconnected.
All connected.
So
but I think the body never makes it. I mean, the body responds to the environment in which it's given, right? So, and I think that's the problem I have with conventional medicine is people look at the symptoms of a disease and treat the symptom rather than trying to understand, okay, the body's responding to something. It's adapting to something. So what is that something and how do we address the root cause of that rather than preventing the body from a normal response? Mm-hmm. And it's like, one of my biggest pet peeves is giving a fever reducer to a kid with fever and an infection. We have to have the body has to heat up in order to kill the infection. And when
Yeah,
we
for a
suppress
reason.
fever, we basically handcuff the immune system in doing its job. I mean, there's a point where it probably needs to be intervened, but again, trying to lower cholesterol to prevent heart disease, I mean, that's not root cause. That's actually malpractice.
Mhm.
Today with all.
Yeah. So I'm just so in awe with this. So with the insulin resistance, you're talking about for getting delivery of glucose into the cell, especially for athletes and endurance athletes, if they're going exercising. How many people might have a pre-workout drink thinking they're helping improving nitric oxide production because you're trying to get energy into the cell. So there's an involvement of nitric oxides somewhere in there for endurance or just exercise in general, and then what people might
Now, look,
not
there's
do right.
the athletes were the kind of the early adopters for nitric oxide. Going back, 25 years ago, when a Nobel Prize was awarded, there were hundreds of markets or products that hit the market using arginine, right? L-arginine, which was identified as a precursor to nitric oxide. So all these products were hit the market, give arginine, and they would assume that your body could make nitric oxide. And healthy people, I think there may be a pathway for that. But sick people have lost the ability to convert arginine to nitric oxide. So giving more doesn't fix the problem. In fact, it makes it worse. But no, nitric oxide is an extremely important ergogenic aid because the acute effects of nitric oxide, if you actually take a product that produces nitric oxide, it dilates the blood vessels. So now you're going to get better oxygen nutrient delivery. It's going to improve the efficiency of mitochondrial ATP production. So it's going to push your anaerobic threshold back. So now you're going to make more energy with less oxygen. So you're going to have less lactic acid buildup. It's going to improve performance and improve recovery. But now, a lot of companies out there have hijacked that narrative and now providing Beet products as a pre-workout that don't provide any nitric oxide benefit. And people, consumers, athletes associate beets with nitric oxide. And that's the biggest myth in the nitric oxide. Beets are not nitric oxide. In fact, I've tested all the beet products on the market, and most of them, 99% of them, provide no nitric oxide benefit. So buyer beware, because beets are not nitric oxide.
But you hear that you were saying earlier we need 300 to 400 milligrams of nitrate foods, and that
That's right.
beets is one of them, but you're saying it doesn't work because we are not able to convert it.
Well, that's part of the problem. The other problem is most of these beet products on the market don't contain even any detectable amounts of nitrate or nitrate. So they're not even providing the precursor. And look, you need 300 to 400 milligrams. And I've tested all these ingredients, all these products. If in the highest concentration of beet is probably 6 to 9% nitrate, right? So in that case, you're going to need 3,000 to 6,000 milligrams. That's 3 to 6 grams of beet powder. And people are trying to sell you beets in these soft little gels or in a capsule.
Mm-hmm.
So they just either they don't understand math or they're deliberately ignoring the basics, right? Because the
Well,
numbers don't work. Even if it was a nitrate containing beet, the numbers don't work to get enough to produce nitric oxide. But again, that's just part of the problem. The main problem is most of these beet products don't contain any detectable nitrate in them. And then even if it did, if you don't have the right oral bacteria, which most people don't, you just excrete it in the urine, you excrete it in the feces, and you excrete it in the sweat. And then you get no nitric oxide benefit from it. And then if you're taking an antacid, you get no nitric oxide benefits from it.
yeah.
So that's the majority of people. And yet there's companies out there, I don't watch TV, but I see them advertising all day, every day, and trying to sell you a beet product. I mean, people,
Mm-hmm.
come on, wake up. This is not based on science. This is based on deceptive marketing
Yeah.
and really fraud.
And that I see that a lot with different products because I always look at, all right, what is the optimal dose to create? What does the science say this is like beneficial for sleep or whatever product it might be for? I was just looking at sleep one yesterday, and then it had just like 70 milligrams of magnesium. They're saying this, it's a sleep supplement, and it was barely anything in it. So it's just the same kind of thing. All these products is you need to look at what is the optimal dose to create the effect that you're looking for based on scientific research.
No, for sure. And again, that's just part of the problem because even what's on the label isn't sufficient. But number two, last year there was a paper published where a third party tested supplements bought off the shelf, and 72% of the supplements didn't have in them what they had on the label.
Oof.
So let's just say they say there's 70 milligrams of magnesium in that product. There's a 72% chance that doesn't even contain 70% magnesium. I mean, that's why the supplement industry is the wild, wild west. I mean,
Yes.
and I think there's good reason why physicians and practitioners don't recommend supplements, because in most cases, people are wasting their money, especially in the nitric oxide field.
Yeah.
Companies selling products that they have, number one, they don't understand the science. They don't understand what leads to nitric oxide deficiency. So they have no business trying to sell you a product for nitric oxide. And that's what
Mhm.
drives me crazy. Somebody's been doing this for 30 years. And I see these companies out there deliberately deceiving their customers, trying to sell a product that not only doesn't work, it cannot work because they don't understand the science.
Yeah, I go to Expo West Natural Products Show in March in Anaheim each year because my husband goes
Yeah.
for his job. And people hate me when I come to there because I ask them all these questions because usually it's a lot of false
They don't want to,
information.
nobody wants to answer the hard questions.
No. So with another question was on I'm all about the skin parts. How is the
Oh, yeah.
role of as we age, the skin health and nitric oxide connection?
Well, the skin is an organ just like the sex organs or like the brain or the heart, right? So we have to have adequate blood flow. That organ still has to be able to mobilize stem cells to repair and replace dysfunctional cells, and we have to fully oxygenate these superficial cells so they can do their job. So when we look at the loss of nitric oxide production, we see loss of perfusion to the skin. We see loss of collagen and hydration. So fine lines and wrinkles start to show up. And we start to develop age spots, acne, rosacea, and the skin looks unhealthy. So, I thought, well, if we can restore nitric oxide topically, then we can affect that organ, just like we can affect the sex organs or the brain or the heart. But really, what got me interested in skincare was really in wound care, because I was treating my dad, and my dad's 77 years old, and he had a car accident in 1984. It left him paralyzed from the waist down. So, ever since I was 10 years old, I've been dealing with decubitus pressure ulcers in my paraplegic dad. And in 2014, he had a 4-year-old non-healing wound, developed sepsis, stage 4 osteonecrosis, septic, and almost died, but fortunately he survived. But once he got out of the hospital, I took him to all the wound care clinics in and around Texas, and they said, "You will never heal this wound." He's a 60-something-year-old diabetic, paraplegic, been in a wheelchair for 30 years. You cannot heal this wound. And so I refused to accept that as a son, and I started treating him with a nitric oxide releasing gauze. And a 4-year-old non-healing stage 4 ulcer we healed in a matter of months. Because what does nitric oxide do? It gets blood flow to that ischemic wound bed. It kills the bacteria that are causing the infection. So it addresses everything we know about the wound response, killing the infection, getting blood flow to the wound, mobilizing stem cells, granulating the tissue, and regrowing the tissue to close the wound. So once we healed that wound, all these wound care docs were like, "Holy shit, what did you do? How did you do that?" So then again, to bring a drug to market, we're working on an FDA approved drug for wound care, but that's typically 10 years and $800 million, and we're working on it. But
I
we
was
thought
reading
we
that.
can bring this to market as a skincare product because it's
Ah,
healthy skincare. And the hurdle to entry, the barrier to entry for skincare is pretty low. And so
yeah,
we developed a dual chamber topical nitric oxide for skincare and beauty. It's a game changer in beauty.
it does help. I was reading that in the book about how the products that you got, because it was in 2020, they got pushed through to help with illnesses during 2020
Yeah.
that we had the virus that was going around, but you got that pushed to help people, the nitric oxide. Was it the lozenge that helped people?
It was the lozenge. Now we were contacted by the previous Trump administration during the early onset of COVID to help with a drug response to develop early therapy. Because you remember at the time the hospitals were overrun with patients and they didn't have enough beds to treat these really sick patients. But we recognized early on that the people who were getting sick and dying from COVID were the people who couldn't make nitric oxide. The elderly, African Americans, people with previous heart attack, kidney disease, those on dialysis, diabetics. And so our challenge was to create a nitric oxide early therapy to prevent the hypoxemia and keep patients out of the hospital. Because we knew early on that if you couldn't make nitric oxide, you overexpress the ACE2 receptor, And once you got exposed to the virus, there were lots of targets. The virus entered, it propagated and replicated and made people sick, and they lost blood oxygen saturation. They'd go to the hospital, they put them on 100% oxygen, give them omeprazole, develop metabolic acidosis, put them on a mechanical vent, further exacerbate the metabolic acidosis, and people died. And that was a very predictable clinical response. So I thought was if we could detect these patients within 72 hours of diagnosis or onset of symptoms, deliver nitric oxide through our orally disintegrating tablet, we could downregulate the ACE2 receptor, we could prevent the virus from replicating in the body, and we could improve blood oxygen saturation. And that's exactly what we did. That's exactly what we demonstrated. But then, a new administration came in and they were hell-bent on putting a shot in an untested mRNA in the arm of everybody in the world, and they weren't interested in early therapeutics. So we were dead on arrival.
Too bad. So I touch on one more thing and then go to solutions. Neurological symptoms is migraines. I mentioned headaches, brain fog, memory issues, and vagus nerve dysfunction. Anything neurologically that you find with the low nitric oxide production?
Well, sure, because if you look at the basis of any neurological disease, you can look at SPECT scans, and that's the work of Daniel Amen, or functional MRIs, and look at, perfusion of different regions of the brain. And in SPECT scans, it's really an illustration of, focal ischemia. So whether you're looking at Parkinson's, ADHD, migraines, addictive disorders, dementia, Alzheimer's, there's always a loss of regulation of blood flow to a particular region of the brain. So if you're not fully oxygenating and delivering nutrients to certain cells or regions of the brain, then those cells can't do their job, and you develop neurological symptoms. And depending upon those symptoms, they have different names. But there's a reason it's called vascular dementia, because it's a vascular disease. And migraines, many migraines are caused from cerebral vasospasms. And the vasospasm is due to an imbalance in vasoconstrictive vasodilator substances. Nitric oxide is the primary vasodilator. So if you can't make nitric oxide, then you get some vasospasms and mostly vasoconstriction. But, then, your cerebral vascular fluid and your craniosacral pump, can increase in pressure and lose its, mobility and cause tension headaches. But there are a number of causes for headaches. But if we focus on the vasospasm aspects of migraines and the vascular response to many neurological disease and correct that, then they seem to be self-correcting.
So what are ways we can test if we are low? Just look at signs and symptoms we just went over, but if we really want to know, am I low nitric oxide?
That's a common question. And years ago, probably 15 years ago, I developed a salivary test strip because people were wanting to know the same question. How do I know if I need nitric oxide? Today, my answer is simple. There's only two people in the world who need nitric oxide. Number one, if you're sick and want to get well, you need nitric oxide. Number two, if you're well and don't want to get sick, you need nitric oxide. So for me, we don't need to test, right? I mean, the dose, you can dose depending upon the metabolic need. But years ago, I developed a salivary test strip. I abandoned the patents on it because I realized there was, some clinical utility, but people were making misinterpretations of it. And when I abandoned the patents, other companies started manufacturing this lozenge or this test strip. But the problem is there's no false negative. So I think from that perspective, it can provide some utility because there are no false negatives. So if you're low, you're low. But it doesn't tell us, if you know what you're doing, you can interrogate that and figure out why you're low. But the problem I ran into was the false positives. And people who presented with all the clinical symptoms of nitric oxide deficiency, ED, diabetes, high blood pressure, mitochondrial dysfunction. And they'd use the test strip and they'd light it up like a Christmas tree, bright pink. They go, oh, well, I make a lot of nitric oxide. So systemically, they're completely devoid of nitric oxide. Orally, they've got oral dysbiosis, so they got an active oral infection. So there was a disconnect there that people were making some pretty dangerous misinterpretations. They go, look, we got to abandon this. And so now we just say, look, you need nitric oxide. Now, what we have to do, the amount of nitric oxide I need on a daily basis for prophylactic and preventative measures are much different than a person with ED, hypertension, Alzheimer's, dementia. So from a supplemental dose, you can use the physician's best medical judgment on what's best for that patient. But that's what we're trying to do through our drug program is determine the optimal dose that's both safe and efficacious for different indications, heart disease, Alzheimer's, and other clinical indications that we're developing drug therapy for.
So that'd be great. So then you have there's signs and symptoms of low nitric oxide. Then if you have this or all of them, a lot of people have more than one, then this is a route to go add into your program.
For
Having
sure.
some,
But more importantly, I think people need to start to have the conversation is why is my body unable to make nitric oxide?
exactly.
Because look, I'm not interested. I mean, it's like putting a Band-Aid on a bleeding
Yeah.
wound, right? You're not, you get, let's get to the root cause. And so people have to take account of what they're doing. If you're using, if there's fluoride in your toothpaste, throw it out.
Yeah.
If you're using mouthwash, stop using it. If you're on antacids, wean off of them. If you eat a bad diet, anything that causes an increase in blood sugar, stop it. And then start exercising, get sunlight, throw in some more green leafy vegetables. And then let's fix the reason your body has lost the ability to produce nitric oxide. The lozenge is a great product. It's a great solution. But people have to take account and have the discipline to stop doing the things that got them there in the first place and make changes.
Yeah. That's what we do when I'm working with clients is, we don't need to test right away any labs. Let's just clean up the environment, change your lifestyle habits. How do you start the day? How do you end the day? And work on what you're eating and rewire that vagus nerve and get you out of that sympathetic fight or flight mode and get you more resilient. And the breathing exercises, as we're talking about the nasal breathing and how that helps so much. So I love that you say that because it is looking at, all right, yes, I'm low nitric oxide, but we still need to go again a layer deeper. Why is that? And what am I doing? How to course correct that? Because I think so many people find things as this, like, oh, all right, I just buy Dr. Nathan's lozenge and I'm going to be golden and not understand I need to correct my habits.
People, humans, Americans specifically, are programmed to want to take a pill, right? They want to take a magic pill that fixes everything. They don't have to change your diet. They don't have to do anything but take this magic pill. And unfortunately, that doesn't exist. In fact, I don't think it will ever exist, no matter how far we advance science, because the human body always responds to the environment in which it's in. And if we don't change the environment, the body is always going to have this fight or flight response and this adaptive response. And so, again, the lozenge is a great tool and a great way to restore nitric oxide and provide a supplemental dose of nitric oxide. But again, if you're still eating poorly, you're not getting exercise, you're on the antacids, you're using fluoride, and you're on the antacids, you're basically handcuffing the body and its ability to get better. And we need to unlock the handcuffs.
As I would say, it's an order of operations and working on your why. And you can't just start taking something. As I messaged you the other day, methylene blue. A lot of people are talking about again. And I was so disgusted listening to this book after reading your book and all the stuff you taught me. And I'm like, putting all the pieces of the puzzle together. And then I read this book or listen to it. The first chapter is all just nonsense and how that can be so misleading to people to read about, I should take methylene blue. And then also, if you have low estrogen in your thyroid, it says not to do it. But it's just, what would you say the people that have listened to these different ideas of the role of nitric oxide, what would your debate?
Well, look, I mean, consider the source. I think this guy is probably well-intended, but I think he's a journalist. He's not a scientist. He's never probably spent an hour, a minute in a research lab. He doesn't understand biochemistry. So the notion that you want to take a synthetic dye that turns everything blue in your body is beyond me. And so we started this about a lot of misinformation. This isn't knowledge. This is misinformation. And look, they got to make a story because I've known about methylene blue for 40 years. In fact, we use methylene blue. A lot of nitric oxide scientists in the nitric oxide field use methylene blue to elucidate the nitric oxide signaling pathway. Because what is methylene blue? It oxidizes the iron of nitric oxide synthase. It completely shuts down nitric oxide production. It oxidizes the iron of soluble guanylate cyclase, the primary target of nitric oxide. So it completely inhibits nitric oxide signaling. And for them to promote a methylene blue product, they've got to attack the nitric oxide signaling and make that bad somehow. Because if methylene blue is good, nitric oxide has to be bad. And that's the story that this journalist with no credentials, no pedigree, no science, no medicine background, wrote a book about, and now you've got influencers out there again with no credentials, no pedigree, telling everybody you should take methylene blue. And it's a very dangerous proposition. And I think, the biohacking community is a very strong force, and I'm a big advocate for that. But you have to consider the source. And, don't take recommendations from people who don't have an understanding of basic biochemistry and physiology. But yeah. So let me just say, there may be doses of methylene blue that methylene blue is critical if you're sick and you've got an infection and you've got some neurological problem. But that's at the discretion of a physician who understands the risk profile of any drug or any medical intervention. But taking this prophylactically on a daily basis, I couldn't think of anything worse I would do. I would never take this, never in a million years, because I think the science tells us, both the basic science and the clinical science, we need nitric oxide. We need adequate nitric oxide production. Anything that disrupts or inhibits nitric oxide production or signaling is bad news.
That's what I understand, and it makes sense to me. And then I listened to this book that people are talking about, going, okay, no wonder why everyone's screwed up out there. The people don't always know what to listen to and what to believe.
Look,
and
here's the thing.
They don't pay attention.
There's still cardiologists who think cholesterol causes heart disease.
Yeah.
Despite the preponderance of evidence, all the clinical data showing that cholesterol-lowering medication provides zero benefit in primary, secondary, or tertiary prevention.
Mm-hmm.
If there's no benefit in the risk, well, let's look at the laundry list of risk of lowering your cholesterol. Can't make vitamin D, can't make testosterone, you can't make estrogen, you become immunocompromised, you develop insulin resistance. It's a mitochondrial toxin causing Alzheimer's and causing cancer. But yet there's still cardiologists in the field who treat cholesterol as a means for preventing heart disease. So again, it's misinformation and the complete ignorance and the ignoring of science to take that information and develop it into knowledge and wisdom on how to take care of people. And some people just refuse because that's the way they've taught. And it's like they'll say, it's hard to teach old dogs new tricks, but this is people's health and lives and livelihood that's on the line here.
Well, for example, I know someone that just had a scan. They had plaque, floating plaque or free plaque set, and their doctor gave them double statins. And
yeah, look, that's malpractice at this stage. I mean, the evidence is clear. Yeah.
And they're paying a lot of money for concierge doctors. And I said, you might want to double check that he's doing this double dose of statins to work on the plaques. Like, well, should we look at other solutions?
Patients need to have the courage to fire their doctor. If you take your car to a mechanic and your car keeps breaking down, mm-hmm. everybody in the world would never go back to that mechanic. We got to consider our body as a beautiful instrument. And if it's not working and your doctor's not making it better and you keep breaking down, fire that doctor. You would fire the mechanic that couldn't fix your car. Fire the doctor who can't fix you. There are good doctors out there who understand root cause and understand biochemistry, nutrient deficiency, exposure to toxins, address that, rather than just trying to find the simple solution of writing a prescription that has no regard to the underlying root cause of disease.
And I know in your book, you talked a little bit about using the nitric oxide for people that have some high blood pressure problems we talked about already, but anyone that has plaque buildup, didn't it reduce it by 11% in 11%. Some studies?
Yeah, so let's just compare it with cholesterol-lowering medication. If you look at the meta-analysis on all the studies published in the literature, plaque, and some docs will argue, well, it stabilizes the plaque and there's these pleiotropic effects. Bullshit. The best it can do in 3 years, maybe you get a 2.7 reduction in the plaque burden. And there's no discrimination between calcified hard plaque and really vulnerable soft plaque, which is the issue. Our lozenge, 6 months, we reduced the plaque by 11% with no side effects. Well, we did this with side effects. Better sex, better blood pressure regulation, more stem cells in circulation, better mitochondrial function, and their plaque burden gets better. I mean, what else would you want?
It's so frustrating. With the mitochondria, let's go back to that and then talk about the other products, because the mitochondria, you talked a little bit, to explain the role of nitric oxide production in for people that are more active and want to improve their athletic performance, or just energy in general. Yeah. Mitochondria are everywhere. How the influence of good nitric oxide production on the mitochondria.
Well, there's both an acute effect and an adaptive effect of nitric oxide on mitochondrial function. So number one, when we start to exercise, we produce nitric oxide if you're healthy. And then that nitric oxide can bind to complex 1 and complex 4. So complex 1, it prevents electron leakage. So we're recoupling the electron transport chain. So now we're getting more efficient ATP production with one molecule of oxygen, right? So it's leading to a better transfer of electrons and ATP production. So it improves the efficiency of ATP production at cytochrome C oxidase. So that's the acute effects. And that nitric oxide, and some people argue, well, nitric oxide binds to the terminal electron acceptor at cytochrome C oxidase and prevents ATP production. That's on the surface, that may seem true, but here's the reason: is it's a reversible inhibitor of cytochrome C oxidase. So now oxygen can diffuse further into the tissue and extend the anaerobic threshold and prevent those hypoxic cells from generating lactic acid. So now you're improving performance, improving ATP production, and pushing the anaerobic threshold. So you get less lactic acid buildup because you're more efficient, and that leads to improved recovery. So that's the acute effects. The adaptive effects are we can induce PGC1 alpha in the cell and actually turn on mitochondrial biogenesis. So the net effect is we have more mitochondria per cell generating more energy more efficiently, even with less oxygen. So what that translates into is you become a well-oiled machine. You perform better than the competition. And that's the benefits of nitric oxide in sports performance. And that's why many athletes use it, but they have to use a product that actually delivers on it. And Beets do not.
But you sell Beet drink, but it's not the same.
Well, what we did, look, Beets, we had to correct the record. There's a scientific responsibility and obligation because many consumers and many athletes are looking for Beets because they've been misinformed through media. It's okay, if you're looking for Beets as a nitric oxide delivery, then I know how to do this. So what do? We take the beets, we ferment them, so we pre-convert them so that we're not dependent upon each individual's microbiome to get a nitric oxide effect. So everybody gets the same effect from our beets because if your body can't convert it, we've done it for you. Number two, we remove the oxalates because a lot of people drink beets, get kidney stones, high in oxalates, cause a lot of inflammation. Number three, we put electrolytes in it to improve cellular hydration. And then number four, we put mitochondrial ATP, a patented peak ATP product in there. So again, we're providing the metabolic end product of energy, which is ATP, adenosine triphosphate. And we take out the beet pulp, the beet taste, the beet, all that. So it doesn't look or taste like beets. So we call it NO beets, play on words there. But you put it in water, 2 to 3 ounces, you mix it together, it produces nitric oxide gas, and you take it as a shot. So if your body can't make nitric oxide, we've done it for you. And that's the basis for everything we do. And so it's a natural energy product. And I think that's the record we're trying to correct is like, look, majority of beet products on the market do not, cannot, and will not provide nitric oxide. If you're looking for beets as the delivery of nitric oxide, then we're the only game in town, beets.
So if you are doing all the right things and you want to add this in, so doing the lozenges and the drink, that would be good timing, early in the morning, first thing, take it before sauna. I know people say before sex. What purpose, timing, any recommendations there?
Based on the pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics of how we deliver nitric oxide, how much and over what period of time, we found that for 24-hour coverage, you need one dose in the morning, one dose in the evening, so usually 12 hours apart.
So that means the half-life is 12 hours or
the half-life is about 4 to 6 hours. So the half-life is when 50% of that initial signaling and second messenger system is 50% gone. So you don't want it to build up. I mean, we don't see any feedback inhibition on how we're providing nitric oxide, but that's from a cost-effective standpoint, one lozenge 12 hours apart or one dose of our nitric oxide. So what I do, and I've played around with different protocols, but what works for me and what I currently do is when I wake up in the morning, I go and I take a sachet of the NO beets and I turn on my sauna. And while the sauna is heating up, I work out. I typically do 100 push-ups, 100 squats, maybe some jump rope. But I've taken the NO beets and it's opened up my blood vessels. Now I've got adequate blood flow. I'm working out. The perceived exertion is much less. And then I get in my sauna. So I've optimized my circulation. Now I sit at 170 degrees for 30 minutes. Now I'm detoxing. And the infrared sauna is activating my mitochondria. And then during that 30 minutes, I'm doing prayer, meditation, expressing gratitude. And that's how I start my day every day. And during that 30 minutes, I'm trying to figure out How do I be better today than I was yesterday? How am I going to execute on my strategy? Everything I got to get done today, I make a mental game plan that I have to execute. So that's how I start my day. It starts at 5 a.m. because I've got 90 minutes of shit I got to get done before the day starts. And
Yeah,
that means you got to get up before everybody else. And
I
then I
get
watch the
up
sun come
that
up.
early. Yeah, see, I have to get up at, well, today I got up really early, but 4:30 I wake up because we leave at 5 to go to the gym and then do all my morning ritual stuff. And the evening rituals take just as long. So I
Hallelujah.
can't, I go to bed at around 8, but I have to start around 5:36. And it is, a big routine to be healthy. You have to
It's hard
be
work getting healthy.
motivated. But I think that's why going back to people want that magic pill. Because even I was coaching a group last night and they're, complaining, I need this, I'm not that. I'm like, you know what? You got to do this yourself. There's no one's going to do it for you but you.
No,
And to really get better and to feel your best and to improve the aging process, it takes work. It takes commitment. I just like get outside first thing in the morning, 5 minutes, no sunglasses, get outside. I don't care if you just stand there, just get that morning sunlight. At least do that and breathe
yeah.
through your nose. And it's just so amazing how we
No,
just
for
want this
sure.
quick fix. It's hard for people
Look,
to
I tell people
work.
all the time, what I do, there's very few people, Debbie, who have the discipline to do what we do because it's hard work. It's a time commitment. It's a mental commitment,
Mhm.
but it's hard work. But let me tell you what's harder, getting well if you're sick.
Mhm.
So no matter what, you're going to have to work hard to stay healthy, but you're going to have to work harder if you get sick to get healthy again. So if I'm going to put in the work, I want to put in the work to stay healthy and not get sick. But people have to take accountability and have the discipline and responsibility to listen to their body and do the right things. There is no magic pill. There is no magic bullet. It's hard work. But here's what I recognize: that if I fall off the wagon and I go out and I travel a lot and I eat a bad diet and I don't have time to exercise, the next 2 days I make a mental note that I don't feel good and I don't want to wake up every day, any day, and not be at my absolute best. Because here's what we all have a limited time on Earth, and every day I want to make the best out of this time here. And if I feel bad, I'm not going to be productive.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, I live in a very competitive world where I have to be productive and I have to outthink, outperform the competition every day. Everybody's looking for me to slip up any single day, and I'm not going to give them that pleasure.
Well, people have to read your book because you explain that and you are very driven
Yeah.
because the stuff you had to go through to get what you shared here and get this product out and get where you are today is pretty dang impressive. I would have been burned out, broken down years ago. So you've pushed
I
and
was tried many times.
you've gone through a lot, and I commend you for that and following your purpose and having this mission because you just keep going and going and going. So I think that morning routine is helping you keep sane. It sounds that it's helping you keep balanced. So keep it up, but keep
No,
taking
for
care of
sure.
you.
Yeah, well, thank you, Debbie. I appreciate all you do.